Thank you, Mr. Mike, for a little bit of traveling music. I appreciate that as I transition. And I just want to say a shout out to our tech team who's always working hard. We have new technology here in the sanctuary, which we're excited about. And I'm pretty impressed that Mark figured out a way to make the things twinkle on the screen that you're looking at. That's not something that just anyone can do, so we appreciate that. Today we're going to talk about Advent and what it means to prepare for things. And Advent is a time of preparation. It's a time when we're all busy doing the next thing, right? Jesus is coming, look busy. It has a feeling in our lives like there's something to look forward to. There's something ahead of us. There's something that we're building up toward. And I don't know about you, but I think that's a lot of fun. I really enjoy the season of Advent, of being able to prepare for Christmas. I was on my roof just a couple days ago putting up lights. We have a tree that we put up, and it's just a good reminder that the word Advent itself actually means to prepare for the arrival of someone or something. And so as we begin to prepare, as we start to put up our trees and go through our lists of things, a question that we should be asking is, what are we preparing for? If your list is anything like mine, it looks something like this. We have a lot of things that we're trying to accomplish, and I know I'm not the only one that's kind of relieved that this list is smaller than usual. That one of the gifts 2020 has given us is that there are far fewer people trampling mud into our houses. Somebody say amen, right? We have a little less cooking and cleaning to do. We have a little less pressure on us. There are fewer Christmas parties to get babysitters for. There's fewer activities that we have to be at. And while we're mourning that, I think there's also at least a blessing that there's less to do. And so I think this year of 2020 is actually a great time for us to recalibrate, to refocus, if you will, on what is really important to us. What exactly are we preparing for? And one of the things that we've learned in this year is you can't just prepare for everything to go according to plan. You can't just prepare for things to work out. You can't just prepare for the best case scenario. Otherwise, you will be constantly disappointed. And this brings me to one of the things that's really on my list this year, which is to watch all of the great holiday movies. I know some of you have already gotten started. We've already gotten started on a few. We're saving some of the important ones a little later on. But if you've never watched It's a Wonderful Life, this is your year. It's a Wonderful Life is the greatest Christmas movie of all time. That is unquestioned. I won't hear any arguments for anything else. It's a movie that wasn't even appreciated in its own time. But we're going to talk about It's a Wonderful Life, and what better way to do that than to watch just a little bit of it. So this is a setup. George Bailey is telling his dad that he doesn't want to follow in his dad's footsteps, and he plans to do big things.
I know it's soon to talk about it.
No, Pop, I couldn't. I couldn't face being cooped up for the rest of my life in a shabby little office. No, I'm sorry, Pop. I didn't mean that. It's this business of nickels and dimes and spending all your life trying to figure out how to save 3 cents in a length of pipe. I go crazy. I want to do something big and something important.
You know, George, I feel that in a small way we're doing something important. It's satisfying a fundamental urge. It's deep in the race for a man to want his own roof and walls and fireplace. And we're helping him get those things in our shabby little office.
I know, Pop. I know that. I wish I felt that I've been hoarding pennies like a miser here in order to... Most of my friends have already finished college. I just feel like if I didn't get away, I'd bust.
Mm-hmm. Yes. You're right, son.
You see what I mean, don't you, Pop?
This town is no place for any man unless he's willing to crawl to Potter. Now, you've got talent, son. I've seen it. You get yourself an education and get out of here.
Pop, you want a shock? I think you're a great guy.
So in this scene, you've got George Bailey, who's planned to take on the world. That's sort of his goal, right? Is to go out. He tells this love interest later on, I want to see the Parthenon and the Colosseum, and I want to go to college and see what they know, and then I want to see the world. I have big plans. And ultimately, one of the subplots, themes of It's a Wonderful Life is that it's a movie about unmet expectations. It's about life not going according to plan. And I just got to tell you, if you're looking for a 2020 holiday movie, this is it. This is the movie about when the plans don't match up. And the truth is, right now, we've all have a master's degree in managing unmet expectations. We are so good at this. If somebody says the word pivot to me one more time, my eye twitches every time I hear that. And so in this time of Advent, when we prepare for something new, when we see light at the end of the tunnel, when we start to see that things might change in the new year, I think it's a really good time for us to evaluate what we're preparing for. What are our motivations? And one of those things that came to me in my quiet time this week, preparing for Thanksgiving, is just how grateful I am to have you all, to have community. When times are tough, we get to be there for each other, even socially distanced. We still get together. We can't wait to see each other. Every time we put on an event in the parking lot, we almost run out of food. Every single time we try and get together, there are more people there. We're finding ways to adapt. We're finding ways to come up with new ways to be the church. And so as we continue to manage our expectations, the question should be, what are we preparing for? Well, the good news is that the good news, the Gospel of Mark, is all about unmet high expectations. See, this passage that we just read that sounds very apocalyptic is somewhat talking about the second coming of Christ, but it's also acknowledging the pain and hurt and frustration of the Jewish Christians in the first century. He's not just naming an unnamed and scary future ahead. He's naming an unnamed and scary present reality that Mark and his people are in. Pastor Wolfgang said in the earlier sermon today that there's a war going on called the Jewish-Roman War. Now, who do you think is going to win that? So in this horrible time, Mark sees his temple destroyed, the center of their religious life, the place that they know they can gather for sanctuary is gone. And in this really horrible time, Jesus is long gone. It's been 30 years of waiting for Jesus to come back. And things have really settled in to the empire doing whatever it wants to do and pushing little people around. And then they wipe out all of the pastors. The Romans come in and they literally destroy, kill all of the religious pastors, right? So much so that they can't write into the gospel that Jesus argued with the pastors, right? Which would be the Sadducees. They write into the gospel that Jesus argues with the Pharisees, which would be like the church council. There's such a loss of the clergy being gone that they can't even have Jesus argue with them, which is definitely who he would argue with. As a pastor who argues with other pastors, I'm for sure that that's who Jesus was really fighting. But we see the word Pharisee show up in our gospel because by the time Mark sits down to write it, things are so horrible, it's unnamed. They can't even name it. And so what Mark is trying to do is prepare us. He says these things. He says for us to keep awake. Can you advance me? Too far. It tells them to keep awake, to be on the lookout, to be on guard, to keep alert. To pray is even added into one of the manuscripts of this section of Mark 13. And none of these are trying to raise up your anxiety. They're naming your anxiety. They're not trying to make you worried about the future. They're naming the fact that you were already worried. And so, and Pastor Wolfgang said this morning, like being woke is part of this, right? It's a self-awareness. It's a consciousness that things are bad, and we must be vigilant. So it's not quite so much, look busy, Jesus is coming. It's Jesus is coming. How can we prepare for that? So it should be important. It's important for us to note that Mark's gospel in this, even preparing for the future, shouldn't be raising our anxiety. The gospel is always still good news. And the good news in this particular part of Mark is that God is with us in our suffering. And even when our expectations aren't met, we still know that we have hope for a more joyful future. Let's catch back up with the movie a little further along. After things don't go according to plan for George Bailey, the stock market crashes, and he ends up taking over his dad's business, and his dad becomes ill and dies, and George feels like he has to keep it going for the entire town. He gives up on his dream, and he has to reimagine how he's going to live in the world in dreams that he didn't create. And it gets to this part right here.
Yeah, Merry Christmas! Glad you come. How about some of that good spaghetti? We got everything.
Dear Father in heaven, I'm not a praying man, but if you're up there and you can hear me, show me the way. I'm at the end of my rope, and show me the way, oh God.
The opposite of that anxiety is hope, right? It shows up as prayer in this. And in it, George says these words, "Our Father in heaven, I'm not a praying man, but if you're up there and you can hear me, show me the way." And what if what we're preparing for is for Jesus to show us the way? What if what we're preparing for is God's plan for our lives and not just ours? What if Advent was a time when we prayed, "Hey, God, if you're up there and you can hear me, show me the way. Not my will be done, but thy will be done." I love the story. I just love the movie, It's a Wonderful Life, because it reminds us that even when things don't go according to plan, they still go God's way. And the movie's just full with all of the instances in which George's life impacts so many others positively, and that even in his time of need, others show up for him. Which brings me to this. This is my final point here. It's called the balloon theory. There's a professor in a university, and he starts telling people that they need to learn how to find happiness. And so he gets 100 college students together, and he writes each person's name on one balloon and put them in a room like this, where each person has one balloon with their name on it. And he says, "Go find your balloon. Go find your happiness." And people look, and they've been looking for about 30 minutes. And he says, "Okay, stop. How many of you found your balloon? How many of you found happiness?" And they look at him, the professor, and they say, "Only about 4 or 5 of us out of 100 found our happiness." He said, "Let's try it this way. Every time you find a balloon, and it's got somebody else's name on it, why don't you go and give it to them?" And they tried the experiment again. Every time somebody pulled a balloon down, somebody else's happiness, and they looked at it, and then they brought it to that person. They brought it to Caroline, and they brought it to Wolfgang, and they brought it to Bill. And they were done with all the balloons in under 10 minutes. You see, sometimes the plans we make aren't just to make our lives better. But when we do things Christ's way, we find happiness for other people. And ultimately, that's what shows us that our lives are wonderful. It's not always because things go according to our plan. It's when we develop the mindset to follow Christ's plan. This movie's a great example of that. And I pray that for each and every one of you, you spend this Advent time imagining what it is that you're preparing for. And you spend just a little bit of time, even in this year of 2020, realizing that your life is indeed wonderful. Amen.